Library folks, just calm down a little. No, I'm just teasing. Feel free to chat. In fact, I was talking to John, who will be introduced in just a moment. My name is Bannon. I'm the Commissioner and CEO of the Chicago Public Library. So my main goal here is to welcome you to the Harold Washington Library, to Chicago, to the Cindy Pritzker Auditorium for what I know will be a fantastic day of learning. Is this mic on? Yeah, okay, good. I am going to introduce John Bracken, who has been to DPLA before. In fact, it was a DPLA, I think he and I were sitting right next to each other when he first started talking about the possibility of coming to work with DPLA, and that was a couple of years ago now. 1 year ago? 2 years ago now. You know, John has had a long distinguished career in media and journalism and philanthropy, and I had the great pleasure of getting to know him in my role here at the Chicago Public Library. Actually, one of the very first people that I met officially when I moved here 7 years ago, and it was then that I learned about his passion for the work that we do in the library space. And those of you who are familiar with the work that he did at the Knight Foundation, he, I think, pretty much single-handedly, but with some help of his colleagues, breathed new life into the investment and the vision that Knight has had in looking at libraries as a strategic investment in our communities and society and democracy. And so when John decided to move from media and journalism to and philanthropy into the library space, I couldn't have been more thrilled, and it's been a great honor and a great pleasure to get to serve on the DPLA board. I was involved in DPLA at the very beginning in some of the very early convenings when I was at the San Francisco Library, and was able to be a proxy for Luis Herrera, who was then on the board during that time. And so it's been, for me as a career librarian, to watch the arc of this organization go from a startup now to, I think we're moving into a more mature organization, to have someone like John's leadership, someone like John bringing such fresh leadership and ideas, not just to the library space, but to our society and our world. I think we're really fortunate to have him. So with that, I want to welcome to stage John Bracken for his first DPLA as the Executive Director of the Digital Public Library of America. Welcome, John.
Good morning. Welcome to DPLAfest 2019. It is so great to see all of you here, and I'm excited for a jam-packed 2 days. We don't have a lot of time to waste, so I'm going to jump right in. Thank you, Brian. I want to start by thanking the other DPLA board members who are here. I see Jennifer Lee in the third row. Please wave. I know Mary Minnow is here in the back row. I think Denise Stevens is here in the back row in the middle. Thank you, Denise. I don't know if Catherine Marr is here yet, but she will be here this evening helping to close us out. And I don't think Laura DeBonis is here yet. But you will have a chance to meet all those board members and potentially more tomorrow afternoon as we draw near to the close of DPLAfest. We'll have a board meeting, and that's in your schedule and in your packet. To get us started off right, I'm going to ask our dear friend Veranda Pitchford from Khalifa and Michael Delabita, our head of technology at DPLA, to come on out. You all might have noticed that for the first year at DPLAfest, we have a code of conduct that we've asked you all to agree to, and Veranda and Michael are going to tell you what that means and what that process is. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Veranda Pitchford, and I am a librarian. Thank you. You want to introduce?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Delabita. I'm the Director of Technology at DPLA.
Thank you. We are off to an amazing start. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity yet, as we get started, to review the Code of Conduct. The three most important things about it is the goal of the Code of Conduct is to create a welcoming, safe, and fun environment for all of us through our contribution and our participation. There are many people here to support us all in those three goals. DPLA staff, not just him though, Chicago Public Library staff, Chicago Public Library's great security, and the Hoopla event staff, along with those of us who are serving on the Code of Conduct Committee. Now, Michael and I are both serving on it. I know Michelle Frisk had to do a little come and go, but she is another person that's on it, and Valerie Horton from Minitex. Oh, right up there. If anyone has any concerns or questions or observations, please feel free to reach out to any of us, both with your name or something that needs to be anonymous, and we're happy to address it and work with you amongst any of us at any time. We all have each other's cell phone numbers, et cetera, to do so. Do you want to just quickly, the email address?
So if something's not currently happening and you feel the need to report something anonymously, you can also email conduct@dp.la.
So, yes, and so again, the mantra though is welcoming, safe, and fun for all of us involved and a part of this. So thank you all for being here. I know I'm sure no one is looking at their cell phone in their work email. That is so great of you all not to do that. So I know how hard it is to take time away to give your time and your energy to a thing when you're at it. So and please do let us know if we could be a resource or any kind of clarifying thing. We're here to help. I mean, I'm a librarian, so I'm always here to help, okay? So thank you, and I look forward to learning from everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's really important, and thank you to Michelle, Veranda, and Valerie for performing that really important role with us. So how many of you were at your first DPLA Fest? Wow, all right, welcome. How many of you were at the first DPLA Fest in Boston? Wow, a couple, all right. Have you guys been at all of them? Are these lifer DPLA Festers? This is the 5th one we've had, and this is also the 9th year since our original conception, since the idea of DPLA was created in a room in Cambridge. And the goal coming out of that meeting was the notion that we needed to build an open distributed network that would draw on the nation's living heritage from libraries, universities, archives, and museums to educate, inform, and empower everyone in current and future generations. And so that's still our driving mission. I also, over the last few months, we at the staff and with a lot of our stakeholders have had a chance to reflect back on how has the world changed? How has the context in which DPLA exists changed in that decade? If you remember at the beginning of the 2010s, we dove into this. A lot of us involved in the work were very optimistic about the role of technology for making the world a better place. And I think today, many of us, if you look at any headlines every day, are thinking much more critically about the impact that digital technology has on our society. I mean, we have literally seen the weaponization of digital tools and platforms to attack and undermine democracy. And in the midst of all this, libraries and other cultural institutions are being asked to do more and more, too often with less and less resources. Now that context has been driving some mapping and planning scenarios that we've been doing on the staff and with friends and family and with many of you, focused on mapping out what our next decade needs to entail to maximize the impact and role that DPLA can have in American society. Yesterday, many of you were here yesterday, and we spent a day with our network of members from our Cultural Heritage Network, focused on, in about half the day we spent thinking through and walking through feedback to some ideas that we had put forward from staff. We're going to be digesting that and spelling out details in coming weeks about what that future is going to entail for us. But I want to outline 3 things that we know are going to be part of our next decade. One, we know that collaboration is the essence of who we are as an organization and as a network. We succeed when our partners succeed. Second, We believe in the transformational potential of technology to unleash creativity and spread knowledge for everyone. Third, we are committed to being a better partner for communities, especially those that have been historically excluded from rooms and conversations like this one. Over the next 2 days, I hope you expect to see those 3 areas represented in the conversations on stages like this one, in our breakout sessions that you all have created, and in your hallway conversations. A passion for collaboration, excitement about the potential for technology to building a better world, and critical conversations about race and power in American society. This also will be manifested through a couple of updates we have this morning. First, to tell you more and add some flesh to what we talked about yesterday, I'm going to invite up the core of Greg Cram, who's been the chair of our Network Advisory Council, Ann Hanlon, Greg's from the New York Public Library, Ann Hanlon from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, who's the vice chair of our Network Council, and Adrian Turner from the California Digital Library, who is the chair of our Network Council. And
hi, everyone. We just wanted to maybe provide a quick recap in terms of what Network and Advisory Council are. So they're basically key governance structures within DPLA's membership program for hubs, and they comprise representatives from across the DPLA hub network. And so members of Network Council, Advisory Council, as well as the working groups, can you please stand? So I think many of you are here today, so all righty. So together, Network and Advisory Council, we provide hubs with a formal voice and ownership over network activities, and really an opportunity to advise DPLA on strategy and initiatives that impact the network, as well as providing mechanisms for acting on solutions that are of shared interest. So we have working groups, we have a new task force that was launched, and mechanisms to spin up new working groups and whatnot. And so as John mentioned, I mean, we had a really productive all-day meeting yesterday with members from across all these different groups, where we really honed in on strategy, and we started to think about some initial ideas about potential priorities for inclusion on a work plan for over the next year or so. So if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing within the Network and Advisory Council context, the DPLA Hubs membership program generally, as well as what you could do to help shape network activities, feel free to touch base with any of us. You saw folks stand up here. Feel free to touch base with us or with DPLA staff. And yeah, we'd love to have you on board in the network. So thank you.
I want to particularly thank Greg, Adrian, and Ann. They have been such core partners. And as I said yesterday in the meeting, each meeting we've had of the Advisory Council has been more valuable to our work at DPLA and as the staff. And I know that's rare for such entities. And we are so lucky to have the participation of this community and to have them representing and really being with us at the table. So thank you three for really all you've done. You guys have put in an enormous amount of work, and it shows, and we appreciate it. Let's give them the whole committee, let's give them a round of applause. So now for our next announcement, I want to invite up Michelle Kimpton of DPLA, who's she's got so many different titles at DPLA, I don't know which one to use, but she helps run DPLA and has really been driving business development for us for the last couple of years. And we're going to be joined by Tony Age, who is the Chief Digital Officer of New York Public Library, and Robert Miller, who is the CEO of Lyrasis. And I am not going to say anything more. I'm going to let Michelle unroll why we have these awesome people with us.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everybody. We, DPLA, are really excited today to announce a partnership and a collaboration with NYPL and Lyrasis to give libraries a choice to deliver content to their patrons on a platform that is library-driven and owned by them, and a choice to choose the kinds of content so that it's diverse and it's inclusive and it is more than just the bestsellers. And so with that, we are kicking off the partnership today. With the partnership comes a group of founding stakeholders, which makes up an advisory council. They will inform the work and the decisions that we make to advance the platform called Simply E and the DPLA Exchange, which is the content marketplace. I'd like to take this moment to tell you who is on the advisory council. Valerie Horton of Minitex, Deidre Brennan of Rails, Michael Blackwell of Maryland Library Consortium, Ken Wiggins from Connecticut State Library, the state librarian, as well as Paula McKinnon from Khalifa. So I'd like to thank all of them for being on this founding advisory council. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Robert from Lyrasis.
Thanks, Michelle, and welcome, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I've been to 4, I think, John, of the 5, including the first and second one. I'm thrilled beyond words, but I have a few words to mention. The partnership with NYPL and DPLA, I think, provides all of you with really a once, in my estimation, lifetime or at least decade opportunity to really reclaim impact, engage with choice, and I think galvanize and connect with your communities perhaps in a way you've never considered. So our roots go back very far. From a Lyrasis perspective, working with public libraries, we're committing today publicly to support the DPLA project and the efforts with NYPL to help you be better and more successful with what you're trying to do. So with that, thank you for the privilege of letting us speak. And Tony, maybe you can frame it for us even better.
Thank you, Robert. So thank you, and thank you for having me on the stage with you. This is a project that's been going for a very, very long time. It reminds me a bit of the way that they built the Oxford English Dictionary. There were 3 editors, and the editor that started it died before it was completed, and the guy who was the editor when it was finished wasn't born when it was started, and I guess I represent... I guess I represent that guy in the middle. So this project was started a long time before I got here through the Readers First initiative, I think, led by people like Michael and others around the community. And it was certainly started long before I got here by people like James English, now at Lyrasis, and Micah, who's driving the exchange at the DPLA. There are kind of significant parts to this project, a lot of moving parts, but we're very pleased to say that it works. We've been using it at the NYPL, we've been using Simply E as the front end to deliver all of our ebooks now for a couple of years. And we're ready now to start rolling that out. Of course, the big thing that's always been missing were the books at the back, and now with the launch of the exchange, we now have an option on books, a much broader range of books, the opportunity for librarians to take complete control of this entire environment. So we're very excited that we're now giving you, hopefully, the tools so that you can rebuild that relationship with your own patrons and start driving reading all the way through from cradle to grave, and so that the people that weren't born and the people who don't see the end of it, at least will know that we've done some great work for them. So thank you.
Thank you. This is really exciting for us at DPLA, and there are many people to thank and acknowledge for the work, none more so than the Sloan Foundation, represented today by Doran Weber, who's here, who's been a core partner for us. I'll gush a little bit more about Doran this afternoon when he comes up on stage, but all of our work with ebooks has been driven by an extraordinary partnership. I mean, funding is a key part of that partnership, but there's an intellectual engagement and support that we get from Sloan Foundation that, having been a funder, is extraordinary. So we're really appreciative of everything Sloan Foundation has enabled for us. So next, it's my pleasure to tee up the next conversation. And I don't want to say anything. I kind of just want to get out of the way. I will say that the conversations I've had with the 3 women that you're about to hear from, both prepping for today and in the past, has really inspired and motivated a lot of our thinking at DPLA about what our role should be. Tracie Hall, whom you'll hear from in the conversation, is an artist in her own right, is a curator, runs her own museum, is an educator, is a teacher, has been a counsel to DPLA, and runs the cultural, on top of all that, her day job is running the culture program for the Joyce Foundation here in Chicago. Danah Boyd is known to many of you, I'm sure, one of the leading thinkers for 10 years plus about the role of the internet, the impact of digital emergence on society, and tracking conversations in advance before many of us find out about them. And Elaine Westbrooks is the chief librarian at the University of North Carolina, and is going to kick us off. And we're really excited I'm going to get out of the way so you can hear from these three folks, because it's going to be much more exciting than hearing from us.
All right, good morning. Gosh, we haven't had our coffee this morning. So let me try that again. Good morning. All right, that's a little bit better. So thanks, John. There he is, for that introduction. I'm really delighted to be here, and I'd like to thank Chris Kowalski, who has herded me and made sure I was available, but also the other DPLA staff who have been amazing in helping put this meeting together and also make this possible. So for this keynote, I really wanted to leave you with a number of ideas to think about, and we will have a conversation afterwards. And so I can't go into huge amounts of details, but I do want to poke at a few things that have been bothering me for many years. First off, I can say that I am abundantly optimistic about the future of the librarianship, the profession, and I'm also optimistic about the future of this country. And I can say that this country needs to confront and reckon with its past. And let me say that again. This country needs to confront and reckon with our complex past. And I believe that libraries and archives and cultural heritage institutions can play a key role in that reconciliation. Sorry, I probably should have shown this a little earlier. As we all know, the state of this country and where we sit today is full of factionism and rancor. And this will pass, and we will move forward. But it goes back to what future do we want to create, and how do we as librarians and archivists and people who are in this business facilitate that growth and move us into a much better place. So this always goes back to, well, what is it that we do? And for 5,000 years, libraries and archives and museums and things, or actually largely libraries and archives, have really been in the business of preservation, curation, organization, archiving, all for access, to put materials in the hands of the people who need them, in the hands of the citizens of this country. And that has been the what, and that has been really important goal for us. But I think it is really important that this record that we have been committed to preserving and archiving and organizing is incomplete. It's exclusive, and there are many, many voices that are not there. So, I've been at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for about a year and a half, and so I still consider myself newish, and I think that when I got there, it was super exciting, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go, and so, I came in there with this idea that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is it. I have to define what it is. What does it mean to be a library nowadays? I don't have to explain it to you, but you all know libraries are so different. They're transforming, and you cannot approach libraries the way we did 10 or 15 years ago. So that's the mindset that I came in. And then I also thought about the basics that we've all heard about, which is, at a research university, I'm focused on advancing that mission of the university, right? And it's the mission of any university is research, teaching, and learning. And if you have a medical school, you can also add that healing aspect. And so I was really, again, saying, you know, this is what my job as a leader is, and this is what I have to focus on. But what became really clear to me is that the thing that I need to focus on the most is community. And the community that I have at the University of North Carolina, but also I think of the community as the entire state of North Carolina. So that is something that has really forced me to change my approach to how I lead, but also my approach to how I think about the future of the profession and the things that are most important to us at this moment. So here is a shot of our collection from the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center. And this is a statewide digitization and digital publishing program hosted by my library. And this is one of the key collections that we have where we're able to go into the 100 counties of the state and work with the historical societies and libraries and museums to digitize their content and then host it. But it's very clear to me that this is an incomplete assessment of the citizens of the state of North Carolina. And this is something that troubles me, and I don't know how many of you were involved in yearbooks. And if we all go back to early February and a certain governor in the southern state whose initials are Ralph Northam, so I need to see the hands. How many of you were involved in a discussion about what to do with your yearbooks that you have digitized online? Raise your hand if you were involved in some discussion. Okay, so that's, there's a fair amount of people here, but to me, this is indicative of where we are today. And so I remember getting that email, and so at the University of North Carolina, we've already digitized over 13,000 yearbooks. And you can rest assured that there are a lot of offensive things, not only in these yearbooks, but in lots of things that we have in libraries and archives. And I actually wouldn't have it any other way. There's something to offend everybody in our collections. But this whole idea of these yearbooks, and it was just one of those things where you're just trying to figure out that our job is to create access to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we had reporters calling, and I had the provost calling, and people are like, oh, what are we going to do? Now, meanwhile, these things have been digitized for years, but this incident happened. And so our usage of these yearbooks went up like 500%. So it's like, in fact, we had tweeted, we said, look, if you're interested in yearbooks, here you go. Now, if you're digging for dirt, like I don't really support that, but if you want to see the history and the complex history of the state, yearbooks is one of those things you want to look at. So the other thing I'd like to mention is, as I indicated, I've only been at Chapel Hill for about a year and a half, and actually my first day on the job was the day after Charlottesville. So that tells you the climate I was walking into and saying Charlottesville is not that far from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And this event forever changed my life. The first message I sent to my staff was about Charlottesville. And this ugly, reprehensible, deplorable event really forced me to shift my focus to think about the community. The second thing that I was blessed to deal with at my tenure, and I'm already on my second provost and second chancellor too, by the way, is this Confederate monument. So this is, I believe, this actually isn't the New York Times, but it was the Post or somewhere, Washington Post. And this was the other big incident that really forced me to shift my focus. And I would assume that any of you who are on any campus are dealing with these things, whether it's the names of buildings or things like that. But this was really a major event for us because a week after Charlottesville, the protest on campus began, and then it took a year for this monument to be toppled. And so to me, the library was front and center to this discussion. And to quote Audre Lorde, I could not sit there and be silent. It was really important that the library was at the center of these discussions of the complex and rich history that is Confederate monuments, public art, but this is the history of this university, it's the history of the state. So one of the things that I really used to get through this was thinking about how do I respond, what do I do, and I really began to understand that my influence would be the best thing to increase that influence and to focus on it, not in a reactionary way. Now, of course, it was reactionary because I did not plan for Charlottesville. I didn't plan for the Confederate monument to come down, but it was a tremendous opportunity, and I think one of the things that Paul Courant always said was you never miss a crisis. You have to take advantage of them. And so I had crisis after crisis, and I've tried to take advantage of them, but I really wanted to focus on what is it that the library could do for this campus at this time. So one of the things I wanted to mention, and I actually inherited this, I can't take credit for this, but we decided several years ago that the university, and particularly the archives, needs to revisit what we do. And those days of going into communities and taking stuff and bringing it back to the flagship or to this predominantly white institution are over. That's not the way we should be doing business. And so we began thinking about how to build archives with communities and how to support and partner with historically underrepresented history keepers in telling, sharing, and preserving their stories. And that's a very different paradigm from going in, taking the materials, possessing them, and then we are describing them, and we're doing all that work in our framework, right? It's very different. And so this is something I'm really proud that we've been working on. One of the things we focus on is an archivist in a backpack, and we literally distribute dozens of backpacks to communities so that they have the materials that they need to do oral histories and things of that nature. So this brings me to the topic that I originally started with, which is reconciliation. And although I would love to be able to say that the library is helping to reconcile the community of Chapel Hill, the community of North Carolina, the university, but we're actually not there yet. But that's our aspiration, is to contribute to the healing and to bring people together, to connect people. That's what reconciliation is. It's promoting the belief that confronting and reckoning with the past is necessary for successful transitions from conflict, resentment, and tension. So this really put us down a path of questioning everything we do and questioning how we collect, how we describe, and how we think about our work. And this has been truly a powerful grassroots operation, and I have to give many of my staff the credit because they decided, and this was largely in our technical services area, that they decided we want to do something. And so we started something called conscious editing. And so that is systematically looking at our records, our finding aids, and how we describe people that are in our archives, and acknowledging the fact that these are more than documents. These are human stories. These are lives. And recognizing that the bulk of the materials, the millions and millions of pages of manuscripts, images, are essentially excluding large groups of people. So if you're a scholar and you're studying the legacy of slavery, you will find lots of information about white families. But finding the information about the enslaved and kidnapped people, the Africans who are in North Carolina, it's very difficult. And so as a scholar, they learn how to work around these problems. But at some point, we have to take responsibility. One of the things that we've really tackled is this concept called marketness. And so marketness is this linguistic term that really focuses on how we describe people. So the idea is that when things are unmarked, they're normal. So the word American, that's a normal term. The word African American is not normal, right? So when so even when you talk about the archives and you list the word farmer, the assumption is that it's a white farmer. And so we have gone through this process of understanding who is it that we are talking about. And if we are talking about a white farmer, we're going to indicate it's a white farmer. If we're talking about an African-American farmer, that's how we're going to mention, or an indigenous farmer. And so that's a process that takes a great deal of time, but it's something that I'm super excited about, and we all know about the subject headings that have existed that are, I think, clearly sexist and racist. And those are things that we're trying to really question. And I also have to call out the work of Michelle Coswell, who's a professor of archival studies at UCLA. Her groundbreaking work on identifying and dismantling white supremacy in the archives is something that we look to, and that is something that she's done some amazing work, and I think that it's really up to us to look at ourselves and to say, how do we describe the people who built this country, who built the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill? The university started in 1789, and many of the students who came to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, brought their slaves with them. And the building of the buildings were it's in the dirt, and the fact that we had enslaved people is a big part of who we are. And that has to be acknowledged. And so thinking about how do we build databases and how do we actually give voice to the voiceless is really important, and it's really important when you think about Confederate monuments. It's really important about building names. And I think that I can go on and on about how we can dismantle these structures that are not allowing us to live up to our full potential. In libraries, we talk a lot about our values, but there definitely is a gap between our values and what we actually do. And so if you want to be inclusive and you want to be a place where people who have barriers to access, then you really have to look at yourself. And so for me, I believe we don't have the luxury of saying we're going to reconcile ourselves, and then when we're finished with that, we will help this community heal. I don't have that luxury, and so now it's about how do we reconcile ourselves, our practices, our policies, and our procedures, and then take what we learn to work with the campus, to work with the faculty, to work with the students and the administration to understand how truth, memory, and evidence are critical to understanding our past. But also, if you want to understand where you're going to go and what kind of future you're going to have, you have to be committed to reconciliation and confronting the past. So as I started, I said that I'm really optimistic, and I truly am. I think that there are so many opportunities for librarians and archivists and museums and whatever kind of work you do, whether it's a public library or academic library, there are so many opportunities out there. And I would urge you to think about how you use your expertise to further the truth, but also to think about how we confront our past to have a better future. Thank you.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Elaine so much for her inspirational words and the good reminder of how much work there is to be done and the possibility of this community in doing it. I'm going to flip the conversation. I'm going to talk about how things are becoming strategically undone so that we can all understand some of what's at play right now. I love this community, and part of why is because all of you are deeply committed to producing, curating, and enabling access to knowledge. You've embraced the internet with glee, and I heart that coming of and from the internet. You recognize the potential for technology to actually help get access to information for so many people. And many of you I've talked to over the years have seen the potential of these information to enable our democracy, the civic potential of new technologies, and the importance of an informed citizenry in this democracy. And yet, slowly and systematically, a virus has spread, using the technology that many of us have embraced over the years to systematically tear at the social fabric of public life. Now, this shouldn't actually be that surprising. After all, most of Silicon Valley in the late 90s and early aughts was obsessed with Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, and somehow along the way missed the fact that it was a dystopian novel. So, epistemology, a term that we use to describe how we know what we know. Right? Most people think about knowledge as the process of obtaining it, and they think of ignorance as the not yet knowable, things we haven't yet learned. But what if ignorance is strategically manufactured? What if the tools of knowledge production are perverted to enable ignorance? In 1995, Robert Proctor and Ian Boyle coined a term, agnotology, to describe the strategic and purposeful production of ignorance. A lot of work has gone into this, looking at how agnotology is intentionally achieved. We're talking about the purposeful erasure of history, the purposeful undoing of scientific knowledge, the idea that we can take what we once know and we can erase it, and we can erase people's lives and their culture. Agnotology is a tool of oppression by those in powerful positions. So swirling all around us right now are conversations about how social media platforms need to get better at content management. Last week, Congress held hearings on the dynamics of white supremacy online and the perception that technology companies engage in anti-conservative bias. Many people seeped in history and committed to evidence-based decision-making are experiencing a collective feeling of being gaslit, the concept that emerges from a film on domestic violence to explain how someone's sense of reality can be intentionally destabilized by an abuser. So how do you end up processing what you hear when you hear these voices walking into Congress to undo knowledge about our own past? Right? The idea that a black conservative commentator is testifying before Congress in a hearing about white supremacy, that the Southern strategy never existed, and that white nationalism is an invention of Democrats to scare black people. That is what she testified to last week. Keep in mind that this commentator was intentionally trolled by the terrorist in Christchurch, and she responded to that atrocity with tweets saying lol and haha. Speaking of Christchurch, we got to talk about what happened at Christchurch. We all know the basic horrific narrative. A terrorist espousing white nationalist messages live streams himself while brutally murdering 50 people worshiping in a mosque in New Zealand, styled as a first-person shooter from a video game. Beyond that atrocity, what else was happening? Because there was a lot going on there that wasn't as necessarily visible. First, that terrorist understood the vulnerabilities of both social media and news media and the relationship between them. He posted originally his message on a board known as 8chan, his intention with links to his manifesto. But it was actually really notable because the link to the live stream wasn't an active link. You had to actually manually take it and copy it into to your browser, purposefully so that Facebook would not see the traffic coming from 8chan. The video included 6.5 minutes of him driving around, presumably to build an audience in 8chan, but also to trick content moderators who might have looked at that material because they tend to look at the beginnings of things, but they don't follow it for hours and hours. It's a good way of making certain that people don't know what it is at first. He titled his manifesto with a name of a well-known white nationalist call sign, knowing that the major news media like CNN would not know what it was, and they would immediately talk about the title of his manifesto. And they did. Because we saw the search engine results of people coming from watching these things on TV and trying to look up what it was. The problem is that what was available to them in the breaking news moment was a trove of white nationalist propaganda, a trove of content that actually hadn't been searched for since the previous time in which it was on national TV. And that time was when Tucker Carlson was trying to tell you it was a conspiracy theory. This is part of what's the exploitation of a data void. That occurs when there's not available information in a search space. And so what pops up is what is created to be horrific. The terrorist in his manifesto also trolled numerous people, shone a spotlight on them to create distractions and redactions from the news media as they tried to make sense of it in real time. One of them was the commentator I previously mentioned. He purposefully and intentionally produced a media spectacle, not just for what you would see on news, but for the signals that would send people to as they were searching and looking up information. And afterwards, what's really notable is how many uploads of that video, that horrific, brutal video of the document of violence, were uploaded through real and fake accounts. Officially, Facebook announced that there were 1.5 million uploads in the first 24 hours. But there were many more across the whole weekend, across every platform. Why? Because a large number of people were trying to figure out where the guardrails were across Facebook and YouTube and other platforms so that they could figure out how to make sure that they could play the media again in the next round. What's most notable about this terrorist is that he's explicit in his white nationalist commitments. Most of those who are actually enabling and propagating white supremacist logics are not. Whether we're talking about the so-called alt-right, who ask basic questions like, are Jews really people? Or the range of people who argue online for racial realism based on long-debunked fabricated science. There's an increasing number of people who are propagating conspiracy theories by simply asking questions as a way of avoiding regulation and as a way of enabling and magnifying white supremacy. That is agnotology, the very act of asking those questions in order to enable the propagation of hate. What's at stake right now is not simply about hate speech versus free speech or the role of state-sponsored bots in political activity. It's much more basic. It's about purposefully and intentionally seeding doubt in order to fragment society, to fragment epistemology. This is a tactic that was well honed by propagandists. Consider this Russian Today poster. Just how reliable is the evidence that suggests human activity impacts on climate change? The answer isn't already really clear-cut. It's only possible to make a balanced judgment if you are better informed. By challenging the accepted view, we reveal a side of the news that you wouldn't normally see because we believe that the more you question, the more you know. That is a way of undoing information, a way of making it so people start to doubt. What's most profound is how much is happening en masse in a set of coordination right now. Teenagers aren't simply radicalized by walking accidentally into a site on the web. It starts with a question usually put into YouTube, and into YouTube because it's the primary search engine for the under 25 sets. Imagine you're a college student trying to figure out this concept your professor said, social justice. What is that? The first result you encounter if you search on YouTube is from PragerU, a conservative organization that is committed to undoing the so-called leftist ideas that are taught at universities. You watch this beautifully produced, $30,000 produced video, which promotes many of the tenets of media literacy. Ask hard questions, follow the money. The video offers a biased and slightly conspiratorial take on what social justice is, suggesting it's not really real, but a manufactured attempt to suppress you. After you watch this, you watch more videos of this kind from people who are professors, or say they are professors and they're experts. This makes you think differently about all the different terms in your classes. So you go into your class one day and you ask your professor a question that was raised on a PragerU site. And your professor reacts in horror, and she stumbles because she doesn't know how to respond to what you're saying. And she just says, we'll talk about this later. But of course, they told you to expect this, that you would be silenced in your classes. And so you want to learn more, and you go deeper, and you look for more information, and you're walking to different kinds of stuff that's been staged for you. Anti-social justice warrior content, anti-feminism, anti-black, racial realism. How far down does the rabbit hole go? As I said, it's the primary search engine for the under 25 sets. It's where high school students and college students go to do research. DPLA works with many phenomenal partners who are all working to curate and make available their archives. But how much of that work is actually on YouTube? Most of DPLA's partners want the content on their site. They want it to be a destination site to go to their places to visit so that you can curate it in the best you can. And that's fantastic. But for most young people, they're actually still going to YouTube. There's not a lot of content that's actually high quality out there. Not a lot of scientific articles that have video explanations. Not a lot of detail where people are first going to search. Herein lies the problem. One of the best ways to seed agnotology is to make sure that doubtful and conspiratorial content are easier to reach than scientific material. And then to make sure that what scientific material is available is undermined. One tactic is to exploit data voids. These are areas where those searches become impossible. Another way is to mess with the kinds of breaking news, to make certain that your stuff gets in at breaking news, to co-opt a term that was left behind, like social justice. But let me offer you another thing that's happening. Some terms are strategically created in order to achieve epistemological fragmentation. In the 1990s, Frank Luntz was the king of doing this with terms like partial birth abortion, climate change, death tax. Every week, he coordinated congressional staffers and told them to focus on the term of the week and push it through the news media to create a drumbeat. It was very effective. Today's drumbeat happens online, and it's no longer just simply a matter of a political game. It is something much more deep. The goal is no longer just to go straight to the news media. It's first to create a world of content and then to push terms through the news media at the right time so people search for them and get certain kinds of content. Terms like caravan, incel, crisis actor. By exploiting those data voids, the lack of viable information, media manipulators can help fragment knowledge and seed doubt. Media manipulators are also very good at messing with structure. They optimize search engines, just like marketers do. They also look to create networks that are hard to undo. YouTube has scientific videos about the value of vaccination, but countless anti-vaxxers have systematically trained YouTube so that when people see a CDC video, the next video they're recommended is an anti-vaxxer video. Right? They do it by watching those videos over and over again, by making comments on both of them to connect the dots. They really start to link things together because they think that the answer is not just to put content up, but to actually shape the whole structure. And that's the structural side of media manipulation. Journalists, of course, get trapped in this telling both sides in order to actually achieve a specific outcome on Google. And this is where you come in. You believe in knowledge, you believe in making sure the public is informed, you understand that knowledge emerges out of contestation and debate, scientific pursuit, with new knowledge replacing old knowledge. Scholars are obsessed with nuance. Producers of knowledge are obsessed with credit and ownership. All of this is being exploited to undo knowledge today. You will not be able to help achieve an informed citizenry, a informed public, simply by making sure that high-quality content is available. You have to understand the network nature in which people are coming to information landscapes, in the middle of an information war, where people are actively looking. And I need your help to help blanket the information ecosystem with information that people need to be able to make informed decisions. As Cory Doctorow wrote, we're not living through a crisis about what is true, we're living through a crisis about how we know whether or not something is true. We're not disagreeing about facts, we're disagreeing about epistemology. The establishment version of epistemology is we use evidence to arrive at the truth, vetted by independent verification, but trust us when we tell you it's all been independently verified by people who were properly skeptical and not the bosom buddies of the people they were supposed to be fact-checking. The alternative facts epistemological method goes like this. The so-called independent experts who were supposed to be verifying the so-called evidence-based truth were actually in bed with the people they were supposed to be fact-checking. In the end, it's all a matter of faith then. You either have faith that their experts are being truthful, or you have faith that we are. Ask your gut what version feels more truthful. And that's where it is important, as we conclude, think about how doubt gets seeded and what you can do to combat doubt. Thank you.
Whew. I want to invite Elaine to join us. Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you. Wow. How many people just feel like you're in the right place at the right time? Just raise your hand. Before we begin, I just want to thank DPLA for really having the prescience to have this conversation start us off. I think that the bookends that each of your sort of like poking sort of provides is perfect framing for this idea of future shapers and culture makers, and outlining the 3 points that John started us off with. I was really going to reflect again on those, but I just want to launch into the conversation. Really, we have a short amount of time, and there's so much to cover. I really wanted each of you, there's so much, Elaine, you started off with this idea of what libraries and archives really are for right now in the 21st century and how that has changed and shifted. And one of the things I'm really interested also, Danah, in your work is thinking about new emergent search behaviors. As well as how information is archived and how information can be purposely opaqued. And so I'm really interested in those ideas. I just wanted to ask you both, if you would just carry on a little bit from your conversations about what you think is the call to action. So all of us are in this room because we're at the table, right? All of us are in this room because we are actors. And I really want to ask you, what is that call to action that you see in your work and what you talked about today?
Yeah, I think that we probably all accept the idea that libraries and archives and museums are not neutral, right? So we accept that fact, but we really have to live that. And I think that it becomes more clear to me as I start to understand more about the work and more how we play an important role in our campuses and our society, that this self-examination has to be intentional and thoughtful, and it's going to be very uncomfortable and painful. And I think we have to embrace that and to say, if we're going to get to the other side, we have to do this really tough work. We know that technology is not neutral, right? And that's what Danah spent her career talking about. And so that self-examination is really what it's all about, and having the courage to think about it at every level of your organization and to push and to poke holes at who are you. And we make choices. We've been making choices about what we collect, what we buy, and who we invite for decades, for centuries. And now we have to go back and say these choices were not designed for inclusion. They were not designed for people who look like me. They were not designed for people who are who really don't fit in these categories. So I think I'll just end right there.
Absolutely. Danah.
I think the hard thing for me in this is that there's a pragmatist response and then there's a radical response. And I say this because, I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to deal with these technologies, what these technologies are doing, the decontextualization, obviously the monetization. That's a whole specific conversation. And in a room like this, a radical response is just to tear that down. And I'm not going to stop you. So there's a lot of fight to be had there. Now the question is, to me, is how many of you also want to think about the pragmatic response? The pragmatic response is that young people are using Google and YouTube. Feel as you may about it, they're going there. That means your content needs to be there whether you like it or not. That there's a certain amount of pragmatic, you have to play within the game, you have to make certain that the highest quality content that you shepherd is available there, that you understand and work with people who can think about SEO, that you coordinate a response to make certain your high quality content of all of the different collections and communities you work with, all of the different community-based organizations all appear in the sites where people are going. But I acknowledge that's a really pragmatic response. And that's a pragmatic response in a particular information war. And one of the things I struggle with is that I'm not sure how to balance the need for a really radical response at a moment where that's going to be immediate, and we're going to see a lot of radicalization of people in the process. And I'd be curious, you've been balancing that. I'd love to hear your thought on how to deal with that tension.
Yeah, I mean, even when we think about the collections that are most troublesome for us, I have over, 40 million manuscripts, and so we have talked about how can we use technology to start poking into the description and access problem that we have in our finding aids. And that is still not going to be easy to be able to automate and to try to replicate a different way of doing business and to think about description in a very different way. So I guess I'm not sure on what we're going to do, but I know that we cannot do it with, with the personnel that we have. It's so much. And that's what makes this problem so overwhelming, is that we're confronted with the scale of content that we have. It becomes so overwhelming, and then we just get paralyzed.
Just a tiny piece. Like, here's one of the hyper practical that I never know, pragmatic that I never know what to deal with. Because search queries determine what people get access to, what information that stuff is coded with affects it. So, do you code and use metadata in your system that includes racist and pejorative terms? Because that's the best way that content will appear. But that's actually really hard and against every sensibility that I have. But that's the tension down to the detail that I really struggle with. Because there's an entirely different search world. Let's say if you search for undocumented people versus searching for illegals. And that's just the nicest of horrible racist terms.
But that's where we then begin to think about our roles as leaders, right? Because we get a chance to, you use the word reconciliation. We really get a chance to shape this. I think that there has been, in some ways, a certain level of passiveness in our profession, and that we actually sort of followed society. I think in some cases, and I think it's Ford who said, if I just did what people asked me to do, I would have bred faster horses, right? But there is this idea that we are leading, and so I wanted to go back to this idea of reconciliation, and also this idea of marketness. Because as we're talking about marketness, I'm thinking about what does that mean to people who are disabled? What does that mean to the queer body? What does that mean to all of these narratives that are submerged, right? What does that mean? Can you talk a little bit more about reconciliation? Because there is this quandary, right? Where do you start? Where do you begin? Do you begin externally, or do you begin where you are?
Wow, man, I'm not a baseball, but you're throwing curveballs right here. So what I would say is the whole idea that we can. So if we talk about go back to marketness, and knowing that we have centuries of referring to the underrepresented, the dispossessed, the like I said, enslaved and kidnapped Africans. I mean, we have the indigenous populations. The way we describe these groups is really horrible. And if you look at the history of the South, and there were far more enslaved and kidnapped Africans in the Carolinas, Virginia, than there were white people. But the archives don't reflect that at all. And so every institution, we actually have to come up with a database just to acknowledge the presence of enslaved and kidnapped Africans. That's, in order to find anything, you have to do that. And these individuals had names, they had families, they contributed to the economies, they made this university what it is today. So that whole marketness component, really, you could just get stuck in that. You really are. And the way that terminology, the way the racist terms have changed and evolved is really amazing. And even in our collections, the actual word slaves is not really used a lot. And so if you're trying to identify specific things, it's just not there. You have to go in and you have to look in the contents and you have to look at the materials. And then you'll find there's a lot of information about these amazing families that happen to be enslaved, but they're not part of the notes. They're not in the description. And it's just amazing that we made these choices. We chose to exclude the bulk of the people who were in Carolina at that time. So I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question that you're asking, is how to think about this and use what we know to make a better world, because I'm just not sure.
Okay, so we're going to hold that there because I think that we want to hold that tension. Then I want to go to this next piece, and it might be the last thing that we have an opportunity to talk about, is the container. Because you talked, Dana, about YouTube, and it's something that I think a lot about. I was hanging out with I have a little cousin who is 10. And she wanted to hang out when I went to Los Angeles, where I'm from. And her hanging out was uploading and showing me all these videos on YouTube that she watches all the time. And so then I asked her about something, and she said, well, here's a YouTube video for that. And I was thinking about what you said about the fact that a lot of our data, and people are agnostic about the container, right? When I worked in libraries, I used to always say that we are so interested in our titles and no one cares. Anyone in a library that looks like they work there is a librarian to the person who enters, right? So I think that there is the same way in which we have to become more agnostic. One, about the container, but then also more interested in this idea that started us off with collaboration. And also with this idea that we begin to think about where are the catchments so that we can pool information as opposed to keeping all of these discrete sort of labeled and titled, well, this is my information, but that's your information. I want you to talk a little bit about that, maybe both of you, because I think now at the university, as the university librarian, and certainly in your work with data and society, we have to begin thinking about going where the people are.
Right. Now, I'll loop this actually out. I was talking with Elaine about this. I'm a trustee of the National Museum of the American Indian. And I don't know how many of you have gotten to see the new Americans exhibit. But one of the things that's amazing about that exhibit is you actually it's the first exhibit that the museum purposefully designed as an educational outreach for white folk. And that's important because you walk in and you are confronted with amazing amounts of material that, to anybody who works with indigenous peoples, knows that this is a racist collection. But for the public, they don't necessarily see it as such at first. You see Land of Lakes images. You see the Redskins from Washington. You see all of these different materials that are just horrible artifacts of hatred. And the exhibit itself works to undo them, right? It works to say, we know where you're at, let's undo them. And this is where the reconciliation piece to me is so important, because how do you start where people are at? And where they're at is not always where we want them to be, right? And so one of the things that I think about in some of these containments, like thinking about how you would produce content for video at different stages of where people are at, where you want them to get somewhere. And what would that look like? What are the different journeys? And what are the journeys within a particular content object or collection? What are the journeys between content objects, so like you can really think about what recommendation engines might actually think about it? And how do you make certain to catch people at the right point? So thinking about not, like, I'm a scholar. We produce the worst titled objects on the planet, right? Because we think they're funny after spending 6, 9, 12 months writing the object, and we're like, that's a great title. And everybody's like, what the hell does that mean, right? The same is true with most content producers in general. You've got to flip it. It's not about the title, about what it is once you know the material. It's the title that gives people the entryway. What is the thing? So like even that question, what is the question that somebody should be asking to get to that object? And are they able to ask all of these different questions and think about all of these different pathways, right? And so think about that history of doing indexing, but take it to the next level. We may not be producing, the classic indexing structures that we once did, but we are still needing the kinds of pathways in that are really important. And that's where I'd say that I think that Elaine and I are actually, in some ways there's a real interesting synergy between this, because that process of reconciliation, which I agree with Elaine should occur within the institutions, also has to be something that the public is brought into. And so figuring out ways of getting the public to come in when they are coming from a place that is not necessarily as far ahead in these conversations as we'd like them to be.
So if I could,
can you just also insert this notion of truth, memory, and evidence that was so compelling as you answer that question?
Yeah, because I think one of the core components is we're talking about justice, and we're talking about reparative and restorative justice. And truth and evidence should lead you to an obvious conclusion that there was harm. And I think that's the missing component, is there is harm in the work that we have done in the exclusionary way we have done it. And so I think the problem is people have to really come to the conclusion that to assume that we are surrounded by sexism or surrounded by transphobia and racism, that is part of this institution of what we call America. It's not an aberration. It's not a few bad apples. This is who we are. And once you accept that, and then accept the fact that there's harm, and that harm has to be addressed in order for communities to live up to their fullest potential, that is very powerful to really, and that's where the truth comes in, is libraries, we have that truth, but we have to accept the fact that it has been altered in many ways because we chose not to express the truths of all people. And it's a long, arduous process. But I actually think we can get there, and I think the Library of Congress is doing things, the National Archives, my institution. I know there are lots of other archives and libraries who are going down this path, and I think it's just awesome that people are willing to do this work, because it's not like the provost is asking me to do this, or it's not like we're doing this because it's the right thing.
And I would say, as we think about technology, I completely agree with Elaine, and I think it's important to recognize that these technologies were built rooted in white supremacy. But what we're seeing unfold right now is not just about white supremacy that is part of the American project, if you will, but it's about a purposeful and strategic effort of white nationalism on top of that is coordinated, and it's meant to actually radicalize people. And so at the same time that we need to be doing all of this restorative work for those of us who are committed to justice, we also really need to be looking out, especially for younger people who don't yet have a sense of how to make sense of this world, for whom that's not just about the dynamics of white supremacy that are, but the coordinated efforts to very much pervert their way of thinking into one that is actually much more extremist in orientation. And this is one that I would say, in that, speaking of containers, many containers don't know how to grapple with it. Technology being an obvious one. They're just like, but we want to be a platform, right? It's just like, that's not gonna work, that's really not gonna work. But there's also a component to it, which is that many educators are not prepared. Elaine's purposefully calling out and talking about the librarian community. A lot of folks who are containers in different ways for community aren't prepared to grapple with this, and they're not prepared to navigate a wave of coordinated and strategic manipulation. And I think that's one of the reasons why at the same time we're doing this work, we have to keep an eye on what this strategic manipulation looks like and where it's going, to check it, to challenge it, and to push it back.
I am really optimistic. We began with optimism, and so as I ask you each to have a last word, I just want to let the record show that I'm optimistic to have thinkers like you, both of you, leading this work, and all of you in your rapt attention and your participation in this work. It is really heartening to me. It's really important to me, especially at this moment, because I really believe that this is Library's hour. I think especially with the digital tools that we now have access to, I think we can lead this moment, and we can demonstrate the reparative work that we're talking about on this stage. I want each of you, because there's going to be so many conversations over the next 2 days and next 48 hours, what would you want us to be thinking about as we move into the rest of this convening? Why don't you start?
Okay. Y'all are building community, by which you don't just mean one blob of people. It's a world of networks that all of you have lived. This is one of the reasons I heart the librarian community. You live and breathe in all sorts of different ways of understanding networks. And you communicate this way, which is why you're like a force to be reckoned with on Twitter, by the way. Whoa. But the thing that I would encourage you to think about, you actually think about all of the materials in its own networks. And you know that the digital is networks. I invite you to actually marry all of this. A lot of what we see unfold and the gameplay that happens, both positively and negatively through technology, is about understanding that information in this environment is not clustered, it's networked. It's not about a collection or a group, it's about networks. And you and your experiences, at least my experience working with all of you, has been that you get it at a core. You understand it in here. My invitation to you is to think about all of the ways in which you can actually flood the information ecosystem and build those networks out there so that people actually walk through paths. And to think about one of the other mandates of the community, which is like, how do you hold people, right? The library holds people. It helps people make sense of the world. Thinking about the Digital Public Library of America is not just about getting information out there. It's building the same structures to hold people that you think about in the physical instantiation of the library. And we need that right now pretty badly.
And I would say a lot of this is really about educating ourselves. There is a vast, deep curriculum about these issues we're talking about, and it's not all in just the archives community, but to really challenge yourself to take those steps to be educated, because it's a long journey, and I know regardless of your identities, this is not something I learned in library school. I tell you, none of this. It's important information, and I think that it starts with individuals who want to see a different kind of world for ourselves and and the people we care about. And I think that is something, as an administrator, I can create those opportunities, but ultimately individuals need to care and to be willing to learn things that are often going to force you to question the way you've been taught and the way things have been happening and the way you're trained in library school and the way you're trained in even outside of library school. There are a lot of challenges to questioning all of these things. And I think take the time. It's not about perfection, and educate yourself as much as possible. And I think that's going to take you immensely far.
Please help me thank both Danah and Elaine for this rousing conversation. Thank you both.
Before you go, we have a couple more closing things. One of the special Chicagoans, actually my boss, decided to pop in and say a few words to you all. Doesn't need much of an introduction, but I have to say, as Mayor Rahm Emanuel transitions out of office, I think that one of his great legacies is the gift that he's given the city of Chicago in investments of the Chicago Public Libraries. In the 2 terms that he served as our mayor, close to north of $300 million of new investments in our public library system, from our buildings to programs to services, has happened under his leadership, and we could not have done it without him. Some of it took going to Washington, D.C., others created financing. So there's no other mayor, in my view, in the United States that is more passionate about what we do in the work of libraries, and he's been an incredible collaborator, and he wanted to pop by and welcome you all today. So please join me in welcoming the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
Thank you. I probably should return the compliment. I've never had a better librarian commissioner than Brian, since I've only had one. So, but he has done a fantastic job in taking my incredible middle Jewish child energy and channeling it into making the libraries a place that actually, in my view, have revitalized a lot of our neighborhoods across the city of Chicago. So I want to step back and do one kind of thing, kind of an overarching kind of mission of what I wanted to see the library kind of revitalized and a renaissance in the Chicago Public Libraries, and a couple ways that we've done that to manifest that. First and foremost, it starts actually with the vision that the library should complement what happens at schools. And what I mean by that is and I wrote about a piece of this, at least in the Atlantic Monthly a while ago, which is 20% of a child's life is in a school, 80% is outside. And if you want the 20% to succeed, you better invest in the 80% as well. Now, there's summer jobs, after school, mentoring, a lot of other things that we've done in our park district, but libraries play that role. So we've done a series of things on programs. And there's a little anecdote. I happen to be on the far southeast side of the city of Chicago in the Hegwish community. And I had about 10, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. And I decided to stop at the neighborhood library. And in the library, it was about 4:30, was a teacher in a section helping like 10 or 15 kids on homework. So as immediately as the visit was over, I called Brian. I said, I just saw this teacher in the library. Where else do we have that? He says, oh, we have it in about 25 out of the 80, well, we now have 82 libraries, or 78 at that time. And I said, okay, we're taking this system-wide. And I know you find it hard to believe, but started the school year later that year, about 5 months later, we had a teacher in every neighborhood library. And the reason is, I have now 3 in college, or as I like to say, free at last. But if, as I used to joke with Alana and Leah, if you want to talk about American history here, if you want to talk about math or science, call your uncle. But Amy and I could do whatever we need to do for our kids to support them. That's not true. It's not true in a city that has 140 languages spoken in its public school. So we made sure that every child in the city of Chicago has exactly the same type of out-of-school academic help that Zachariah, Alana, and Leah get. In addition to that, and this goes to the compliment of the creativity in that process, there was a staff person at Brian's operation. I don't remember the exact name of the program, but then it's a program where you have live online tutoring in English and Spanish on any subject, free. So 6 a.m. to midnight, you can log on, use your library card as your password, which is free, and you can ask about the War of 1812, and you have a person to discuss with you in English and Spanish anything you need, or on the Constitution, or math, or E=mc², any topic. And to me, that ensures what a library is supposed to be, whereas Albert Einstein said, if you know where your library is, that's all you need to know. And that ensured that mission that we were supporting. Now, we have all this data, independent data, done out of the University of Chicago to show that the kids that participate both in the teacher in the library and using the other program are academically growing at a faster rate than other kids in their area or their school. You are also in the city of Chicago, which is leading the country both in graduation growth, 7 consecutive years, college attendance, 7 consecutive years, and reading and math gains for kids in their equal level, whether it's 4th grade, 8th grade, male, female, or gender. All independent studies, University of Chicago, Stanford, and UIC. And the Chicago Public Library is a key compartment of why those kids are making gains academically. In addition to that effort, I was swallowing so you could applaud, but don't worry about it, I'm okay. In addition, though, to that program, we then implemented something I did as a congressman. I started, and then we took it citywide, which is in the summer we have ROMS readers. And we took topics, but we also, if you read 3 books at the library, we gave you 10 books to take home. We gave you a backpack for school. But using the summer slide as a way to then, number 2, using the libraries to push back against the summer slide. And we did it in every library across the city of Chicago. Sometimes we did it in conjunction with our museums. Sometimes it was all part of our summer learning. So not only our libraries, if I can go out of the lane, I know you're all librarians, but our park district, in our camp, half-hour reading every day. When you go to the museum of Science and Industry, the Art Institute, Adler Shed, you then had a program that you wrote out and you get badges. And so every part of the city was reinforcing the school. And our core mission was making, again, we also have, I think it's about 32 of the 82 libraries, all now have early learning centers for toddlers. And they have been redesigned. So my hope is you leave here, go out there, spend some money. I got to balance the budget by the end of the year. But if you go to the Chinatown Library, if you go to any one of the libraries, we have it upstairs, you'll see early learning centers that were designed with the Eric Erickson Institute about how kids from 0 to 3, before they go now to our universal full-day pre-K, which we've implemented, to make sure that the library is part of that learning process. And that was a conceptual change. And there's also other things that have been done. I know you're all in the digital space, but I still believe in the physical presence of a library. And I hope that you walk away, not that the digital is not important, it's essential, but like everything else going on, it's how do you make the bricks and mortar and the new age, not as either or, but and but. And it cannot be an either or. There's a place and there's a value to the sense of community that a library space cannot, that digital cannot replace, and nor should it. I'm all for the digital. I'm all for being able to access material across the country where you cannot go, but we cannot forget how a neighborhood library brings a community together, creates a platform. There are whole things of media centers. We now have recording studios. Take the Whitney Young Library in Chatham on the south side of the city of Chicago, one of the most used libraries. And we've now not only redeveloped it, we used a local architectural firm that never did public work, but it actually has a recording studio. And I don't know if you know the rapper, No Name. Her mother used to take her to the library, so we put a recording studio there. It didn't have it at that point, but that's where she learned her poetry, was at the neighborhood library, and that effort. The second thing that I would say that we, I think, redid is libraries should not look like McDonald's. You want to go to McDonald's? It's a box. So the Chinatown Library is the most architecturally award-winning neighborhood library in the United States of America. And it was done by Skidmore Owings. So in a process, one day, and I'll tell you another anecdote, we're building a new high school in Back of the Yards, which is a Hispanic area. It's Back of the Yards. It's named after behind the stockyards. That's the history. And it used to be all Eastern European were people that worked in the stockyards. So it's called Back of the Yards. It's now predominantly 80-some-odd% Mexican American. We're building a new library. The community comes to see me. It's almost done. And they say, we don't have a neighborhood library, but we have this high school, and we need a neighborhood library. I know you find it hard to believe. We didn't have any money. That's a shock in the public sector. So I swim in the morning, been doing it for 35 years, So I called the next day. In the pool, I came up with this idea, you're gonna have a library in a new school. So I called the architect, or not the architect, I happened to call the head of the building commission. I said, are we putting a library in the new high school in Back of the Yards? They said, yeah. I go, where is it? They said, it's on the 3rd floor. I said, tell them we'd like them on the 1st floor. He goes, well, we're building it. I said, okay, make the other room, I got Jewish motor skills. The last good carpenter we did was Jesus Christ. So, what do I care, okay? So we put in the, delay, you'll pick that up a little later. Right after Passover and Easter, it's a great joke. We ended up moving the library from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, and it's a community library, and there's an entrance for the residents of the Back of the Yards, and there's an entrance from the high school, same library. And it was the first time we ever actually thought of not schools here, libraries here, but co-location, which I hate that term. It sounds like somebody out of the Harris School of Public Policy came up with. Then, thanks for that, I appreciate that. The next thing we did in this process, in the public housing, where we're building housing, there's a line called community benefits. Chicago Public Libraries doesn't have a capital budget. Chicago Housing Authority had $480 million. So what we decided to do, usually that's a room with computers. So we used that line, and we had to go to HUD to get approval. So Skidmore Owings, John Ronan, and Perkins of Will, it was they built 3 different housing projects, some veterans, some seniors, some mixed income, with a neighborhood library in each of them. And it was, again, the vision of creating libraries as a space where you can bring people of different walks of life to have one shared experience. In a world of digital isolation and people actually separating to their own like, only libraries, parks, and schools can create a platform, a singularity of community, even though different walks of life. So we now are having 5 libraries. One is back of the arts. The 3 libraries I just mentioned are all open. One, by Perkins & Will, was nominated in the Helsinki Architectural Award, almost won, but it was a runner-up. And then in the new presidential library of the President Obama's library, there will be a neighborhood library in that center, the first of its kind. And each of these, it was actually an idea, when we were opening up a new facility or breaking ground at IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, I asked John Ronan, I said, would the architectural community of Chicago, which we're famous for, come and participate in doing something in which you're going to make 0 money? You won't lose, but your entire net on this will be bupkis, as we would say in my house. He says we would absolutely respond. And to his credit, 30, I'm doing this by memory, like 32, 33 architectural firms from around the globe participated in the competition to build like 50 public housing units, but a neighborhood library. And if I'm sure since you're all digital, you can download it, okay? I don't have to, yeah, you'll figure it out. You don't have to do what I do, is yell at Alana, could you pull this down for me? I don't know what I'm doing here. But you can go see what I think is now, a new way to envision not only libraries as part of a community, but in part of housing. And they all have the services of U media centers, early learning centers, and I don't know if you know, they're all jammed. You would think that we could have added another 25,000 square feet to each of them in that effort, because you cannot get into these libraries, and they've been open 6 weeks. And so they're already woven. One is in the Little Italy community, which is not far from here. Another one is in the Independence Park, where they lost their library because of a fire, and another one is in Rogers Park. But that has been the vision of the libraries. I can go on in what we have done in different type of programs, from toddlers to learning to summer learning, to then also being able to learn online. But it's actually, in my view, what Brian has done and his team really, really successfully is take the mission of the library, stay true to its principles and values, and then modernize it either architecturally, digital-wise, or otherwise in an access point, that it's still the place of democracy. And I suppose I shouldn't have left this out, but in a time in which we have a president who is tearing the country apart, we still have sections in every neighborhood library that are called citizenship corners, where we assist you in making sure that if you want to be part of the American dream, your library will help you get your citizenship. I do congratulate all of you for what you do, being here also in the city of Chicago, and then you'll see whether you agree with me, but I think you will, that having Brian as the new chair, did I just promote you? No? I did not promote you? Okay. That Brian was no longer going to be the new chair, but he has done a tremendous job here in the Chicago Public Library, and I'm proud of his work, his contribution, to the point that now the people around the country in a new competition out of Germany named Chicago Public Library as the best in the United States and 3rd in the world. And that means that the kids of the city of Chicago and the families of the city of Chicago have a library system not just in every neighborhood, but a place where they can go imagine tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, one thing that we need, as you go on and look for a new job, one of the things, we need your voice of advocacy for libraries. One of the things that I've been shocked by in the last years, I've talked to at least 3 new library deans at different universities who were asked by their presidents or provosts, why do I need a library, right? And I think the conversations and a lot of the threads that are been able to be highlighted here in Chicago about the centrality of the Chicago Public Library are similar to the conversations a lot of us are having in our home institutions. So I want to do, it's my task to get us to the next stage. First, speaking of Chicago Public Library, which has been such a great partner to us over the last years we've been building for this conference, I want to particularly thank Carrie Cassio, who may have snuck off already. Carrie, are you here? Would you stand up, please? Carrie is the assistant, has been our main point of contact here at Chicago Public Library, and none of you would be here were it not for her work and being just such a good diplomat for the library. Second, we launched, those of you who were here last night and at the meeting yesterday, we launched with an amazing reception that was hosted by our friends at Rails and Dee. Dee Brennan, are you here? Where is Dee? Maybe she's not here, but Dee hosted it. It was great. And Mitchell Davis from BiblioBoard. And it was such a great way to launch the couple days. So thank you so much. We'll be thanking all of our sponsors throughout, but I'll just do a first plug. Thank you, all of the sponsors who have enabled this to happen. I also am going to take one point of privilege to acknowledge and thank one of my personal library fairy godmothers. As a professional, the first person to really help me understand the power and significance of libraries in a digital age was the new, at the time, librarian at the MacArthur Foundation, Elizabeth Quinlan, who I see back there, and she's just been a real kind of force for me in getting in the library. So I just want to thank you, Liz, and MacArthur Foundation for being such a good partner. So, if you haven't figured it out yet, Wi-Fi, we're in the library, so Wi-Fi is free and open, but there's also a special conference Wi-Fi on the back of your badge. The hashtag, which here, let's see, I'll pull it up. The hashtag is DPLAfest. Actually, is it DPLAfest or DPLAfest 2019? Which are we going with? I've seen both. Let's go with just plain old hashtag DPLAfest. Off to the sessions. Most sessions are on this floor. There's one on the 7th, one on the 8th, one on the 9th. I would say if you've got any questions, go to the one that you know least about. Go to the session that is the most confusing to you. Sessions are first come, first served, so please have a backup in mind. Don't be too disappointed, or hang out in the hallway and chat with your friends. We have a coffee zone on the 8th floor, sponsored by our friends at Khalifa. Thank you, Khalifa. It's open beginning at 10:30, so it's open. Keep an eye on your belongings. We're in a public space, and keep your eyes on your belongings just in case. And we have volunteers with real live DPLA flags. I don't have one to hold up. It says hold one up. I don't have one to hold up. But ask the volunteers questions, or anyone on the DPLA staff who's got a little ribbon that says staff. And we'll see you this afternoon when we come back here in one room together at the end of the day. Thank you so much.